this is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the NASH Tsunami podcast. Today, we're offering 4 conversations from episode 31, our kickoff of a month-long review of the changing landscape we all saw at EASL Congress 2023 and the American Diabetes Association Scientific Sessions, my one-to-one conversations with Mazen Noureddin and Jörn Schattenberg. This conversation includes the first part of my discussion with Jörn Schattenberg. We start by discussing Jörn's belief that even a dramatic improvement in anti-obesity medications will not resolve all the issues related to fibrosis for MASLD patients, with Jörn giving examples from recent clinical trials and buttressing these with patient cases from his own practice. We compare MASH drug development to the desert and ask which oases are legitimate, which may be mirages, and which actually may create full, rich, new day communities for people living with fibrosis. Finally, for this conversation, we touch briefly on nomenclature and discuss the integral relationship between patient treatment and commercial issues. Our entire key opinion leader and advocate team has been struck forcibly by how many studies provided significant advances in knowledge and how some of these advances might change our underlying appreciation of drugs, diagnostics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and how we think about fatty liver disease overall. It's quite a lot to digest and very exciting to consider, so sit back, listen, learn, enjoy. And when you're done, join the dialogue on our LinkedIn discussion group. So, having had our conversation with Mazen, which you just heard, I'm now here with my good friend and co-host, Jörn Schattenberg. Jörn, I guess it's afternoon for you, and it's still morning for me. Usually when I talk to you, it's evening, but I guess this is afternoon, hey?
Jörn Schattenberg.
Yeah, hi, Roger. Yeah, it's a little bit untypical time for me. I just took off my tie, and I guess you normally don't see me with one, but trying to be a European with style, I wear them during the day.
Yeah, Europeans do that, and actually, I saw you with a tie the entire EASL conference. Every time I saw you, you had a tie on. So I can vouch to the quality of your cravats, if you will. So everything in this podcast starts with you and Louise and me. Louise is still, I think, in transit and didn't get to attend much of the conference. And what we're talking about today really are more issues of drug development and ITs, as more commercial issues, things I think that are closer to your wheelhouse than hers. So what I want to do is I want to pick up on some of the things we didn't cover with Mazen and then talk more broadly about helping our audience. One of the things I've noticed as I've been speaking with folks is between what happened in Vienna and what happened in San Diego and what published in New England Journal and what published in Lancet, an awful lot of people are trying to figure out what next. Like we've had this deluge of information. Really, I think the richest conference in terms of information that I remember in this space, and the promise that it's only going to get more so over time. For today, let's start our review of the month by looking at some of the drug development issues and some of the possible confusions, and then just generally, what are you hearing and what are you thinking? You should talk to people. Let's dive into the aftermath of Mazen's conversation. You noted before I turned the recording on that there were a couple things in that conversation that you wanted to follow up on, so why don't you just pick one and dive in?
Yeah, thank you. You also said we should look at the big picture, and that's so exciting at this time. There's so many things happening in parallel. It's unbelievable. We had EASL and ADA meetings in parallel, so while I was trying to Twitter about late-breaking data in the EASL on resolution of NASH and defattening of the liver, there was actually presentations detailing weight loss GLP-1 dual agonists at the ADA. So I think something we're seeing here is those fields are even moving closer, or the people that are interested in treating metabolic dysfunction-associated steatotic liver disease are dipping in multiple ponds. We're looking at the diabetes treatment. The same drugs might have some efficacy in the liver realm, and the question is, how will we use them wisely? Who will use them, and how do we manage side effects? And this is something that came out very strongly out of your and Mazen's conversation.
One of the things that really struck me is that the retatrutide study actually looked at obese non-diabetic patients, right? So really, it's almost as if diabetes, obesity, and MASLD are related, closely related metabolic syndromes, but each one can get looked at in a vacuum as well, or aside from the other two, really.
Yeah, and we have different endpoints that the regulators are agreeing to. So I think that's in the drug development arena, the crucial difference here. What I was going to say is that something that will for sure stay in the hepatology arena is the management of patients with advanced and cirrhotic liver disease. So far, we've seen one F4 study exploring GLP-1 in these patients. It was a small phase 2 study that I co-authored. We presented at EASL last year, I believe. It was the SEMA F4 study where there was no improvement of liver histology over the time course of the treatment. And albeit being a smaller study, the drug did show the efficacy on weight loss, improvement, A1C, all the things you'd expect from SEMA 2.4. And then, what does it tell us? One of the overarching themes I'm seeing in the field is that even if we achieve weight loss, it might not be the only treatment that you might need for a metabolically diseased patient with severe liver disease. There's a number of studies I'd like to recapitulate to back that. The first one is the Cuban study where they did weight loss in a lot of patients. I believe it was 300 patients, 52 weeks and paired biopsies. And they had fibrosis resolution with a 5% weight loss, but not everybody that lost 5% did have fibrosis regression. So there is inconsistency. Then there was no cirrhotics involved. And there's a French study that did bariatric surgery, and they, after follow-up, did not see that all cirrhotics reverted or fibrosis was improved in every patient, albeit weight loss seen in the bariatric arena. And I can just tell from my clinic, last week I saw a patient that lost 50 kilograms after bariatric surgery, and now 5 years out, she's 70 kilos, down from 120. She had ascites for the first time, decompensation of underlying cirrhosis. So there might be more than just we have to cut off the weight.
Well, I think we know there's more, right? As I said, I thought one of the interesting comments that came out of Vienna was Stephen taking a question, if I recall correctly, on liver volume with resmetirom and saying, well, yeah, there's an effect, and you can't explain that simply by the other things that we know to look at. Something else must be going on there, which could be THR beta specific or not, although it's the only place we know we've seen it yet. So, yeah, I think the liver will keep telling us that it's more complex than we realize.
Agree, and it might, let's put it that way, the changes are not as rapid as you might see weight loss with some of those highly effective drugs, and that's clearly big and good news for a lot of patients suffering from obesity. That also causes a lot of other end organ injury, including skeletal bones, knees, back, and stigma.
True, but then, as I said, I think I mentioned this in the conversation with Mazen. I was struck by how high the discontinuation rates were in the retatrutide study, and it struck me because so much effort is made in these studies to keep patients in, right? That a patient in typical practice will not get the same attention to keep them on drug, particularly if they're not being treated by a researcher, but merely by a physician with 15 minutes per visit. So even when these drugs are great solutions, they won't be great solutions for everybody. And I think that's true of every drug that's ever been developed, virtually regardless of disease.
I agree. And let me add the complexity of the scaling up, so the dose escalation themes, which are very minutely controlled and regulated in clinical trials. And this is probably the answer on how to manage GI side effects. You can probably go slower or de-escalate, and then if it's tolerated, go slow and increase the dose again. But that adds complexity too. And I realized that when I had a patient and they were looking at the pen and they had to turn and twist, and then they were looking for what number is this, it's error prone. So it's not an easy treatment, right? I think we agree here, and management of side effects will be very crucial moving forward.
So what I find so interesting about all this is that it's clear how complex all this will be. And yet, they say in the desert, any drink of water is as good as any other drink. So you could almost, in some ways, view MASH treatment as the desert right now, right? We just had this mirage called obeticholic acid, which now appears to have disappeared for the last time. We have this apparent waterhole called resmetirom, which we're approaching rapidly. They announced they've begun their rolling submission at their NDA. And then off in the horizon, we have lots of other things that look like they might be palm trees, communities, streams of bountiful water and lush fruit, use the metaphor of your choice. But we haven't gone there yet. And you get the sneaking suspicion that none of it's going to be quite as pristine as it feels, which is what you're talking about when you talk about side effects and how do patients actually manage a pen and all those things.
Yeah, I agree. As a MASH nerd, I'm very excited because of all the potential opportunities and treatment combinations that I have in mind. We don't know if all these drugs will be pursued in that indication, whether we'll see the readouts. I would recommend the producers and drug developers to actually look at the liver as one of the crucial organs and one of the organs with an agreed approval pathway here, and increasing the available non-invasive tests that can give you positive signals. And I think Mazen commented on those. But then on the other hand, we don't know whether they'll all be going into that liver arena. And for now, we have, I agree, the waterhole, using the analogy of the desert, because we've seen positive phase 3 data and a good safety profile. That is for sure something that is good news for our liver patients. And this has, led to a momentum. And I think that's the overarching theme I'm seeing after ASLD, after EASL and ADA, is that there is drug developed mental movement. There are opportunities, business opportunities, patient opportunities, and it I think we'll be able to treat fibrotic MASLD in the future.
Listening to you for 3 sentences, I'm also struck by the idea that the change in nomenclature is at the beginning, not hardly at the end. You went from being a MASH nerd to talking about the change in MASLD in the span of about 25 words, and both are appropriate descriptors, but I don't think we figured out what anybody's going to call any of this yet, really. The Global Liver Institute came out with an interesting statement yesterday that they are not going to change the nomenclature they use until September 5th, because by then they hope to have their own impact assessment done if nobody else has. And while I appreciate the benefit of the name change, I think the critique of not having an impact assessment is accurate, that we don't know, Ken Cusi made the comment in our last Rising Tide podcast that having taken a year to get everybody on board the idea that you have these NASH clinical pathways, he wished he could have had a year to use the name NASH to socialize the clinical care pathways before the name got changed. And ironically, the guys who drove this, which is a puzzle, aren't accepting the new name change anyway. So we've got all this uncertainty at once, right? We've got uncertainty around drugs. We've got a nomenclature change that we've got to bring in. And I guess the third piece is testing. As you pointed out, Mazen made the point in our conversation that getting to NITs is going to be huge.
Just as a follow-up to the nomenclature, I think it started as an academic debate, and it has been a thorough process among experts. I'm worried about GLI not being aligned here, and I think it'll be important to use the consensus that has been developed among this Delphi process to come back to common grounds again. But on the other side, we're still talking about the same patients, right? So nothing has changed. I'm seeing a patient with metabolic risk factors with severe advanced liver disease, and I want to offer treatment to them. I am worried that we'll be sidetracked and a lot of energy that has already been spent on this and even more energy might be lost. The good news is the momentum in the drug development arena is there, and we'll use that for the benefit of our patients.
I agree with that. And at this point, as far as nomenclature goes, I'm not concerned about being sidetracked. I think that's avoidable. I think the critique that's got value is that the academics are not the treaters and they're not the patients. So we're going to need for people to act with motivation and energy to figure out how to do the translation on this. Now, the good news is, to go back to your comment on drug development, I've got to believe, although I've not spoken to anybody there about this specifically, that Madrigal is as motivated as anybody in the world right now, literally, to get this communication right, because they're the people who are going to have to explain to doctors who they want to be treating using whatever nomenclature you use, and it's going to be the new nomenclature. So I believe that the burden will wind up falling on the commercial interests and the patient advocates to do the translation. They may not be happy about it, but I don't think they're going to wind up having a choice.
It's just to revisit the thought of how to identify the patients. I mean, the nomenclature was, I think part of it was that we get rid of that negative definition where we have to identify a disease based on that it's not caused by something else. And I think clinicians in primary care will accept that there is a metabolic patient at risk, and that was where also the MASLD definition came from, that develops liver disease.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingnash.com. Next week, we'll be back with Stephen Harrison to discuss some of the major drug development stories of these two sessions. Until then, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.